my little chickadees, welcome back to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly, and the deck I'm looking at this week is Mobius Weapons. So, yep, it's based on the, I'm not going to call it an engine, but the new weapons from Opus 13. There actually haven't been any weapons in the game yet, which is very surprising given that we are 19 sets into the game, and 7 is very strong, but we've only just got weapons, and they aren't just weapons. They are, well, they're not just category 7, sorry. They are category 7, but they originate from Mobius, so they're technically Mobius cards. Hence the deck. But this isn't hinging that much on the weapons as well. The big key card that made me actually build this deck is Maya from Opus 19, because she's very, very strong. And the fact that the weapons happen to fall into that, and that Maya is part Earth, means that it all kind of ties in very nicely to basically being a mono Earth deck. So I'm going to start with the backups, I'll then do the forwards, and then touch on the summons at the end, because the summons are really just kind of generic to this. They don't have a massive part to play for this deck, but you know, that's kind of Earth. They're just generically good cards that will probably help you out in any situation. But anyway, starting with the backups. So there are 3 Mog Mobiuses where you can dull, choose a Mobius forward you control, and give it 1000 power. Now that might seem like a lot, and it is, but part of Maya's effect is when she enters the field, reveal top 2 cards of your, reveal top 5 cards of your deck, add 2 Mobius cards to your hand. That's really strong. So I have tried to include as many Mobius cards in the deck as possible without cutting off its nose to spite its face. So there are 4 Earth Mobius backups, and the whole point was to stay in mono Earth primarily. But yeah, 2 of them are Mog, one of them is Sid Mobius, and he's trash. He deals 4000 damage to a forward your opponent controls for each forward you control, so if you've got 2 you deal 8k something, and it's an EX as well, but still very unreliable. And then there is a Sarah Mobius backup, who gets a Warrior of Light out of your break zone to your hand, I believe. And there aren't many Warriors of Light in this deck, so yeah, didn't really seem worth it. But still, I wanted to include as many Mobius cards as I could, so I put 3 of this Mobius. And to be honest, this card is very, very strong and very useful, because basically, in fact, I believe every single forward is a Mobius forward, so Mobius makes sense. Alright, next up we have Charlotta. So if Charlotta is on the field, Charlotta can produce CP of any element of the forwards you control. So, Multicolour, you've got Sarah, Mobius, and Maya. So that means you'll also be able to generate the water as well. But then you've also got Ruby Weapon that can generate fire, and then you've got Kelga, Wall, and Emerald Weapon, so you'll be able to generate wind out of those as well. So that might be useful. It's just another cheap multi-element, and there's a lot of multi-element backup in this deck. That's kind of the point. But yeah, either way, just having those on the field already, even if you paid through something like Pyro or Shantote to get them onto the field, at least now Charlotta gains those elements whilst they're there. Next up we have Kolka. So a couple of Kolkas. You play Kolka onto the field, and then you can discard a card, at which point you can then choose a forward opponent controls and deal it power equal to the discarded card's power. It is searchable off of Claris, which is quite nice, but yeah, as you've probably told from, or you can probably tell from the deck, it's very heavily leaning into 4 costs or more, which generally means they'll have quite a lot of power, so you'll probably be killing something with Kolka's effect. Next up we have Vanille, standard really good Earth backup. Remove something when it enters the field and makes your opponent have to pay 2 when they cast a summon. That's fine by me, especially with Miss Dragon in the deck as well. It means that they cast any summon songs. I mean, it doesn't even matter, it doesn't have to target anything, but they cast a summon, use Vanille to make it cost 2 extra, which against water is particularly nice because it hinges so heavily on getting their costs down on their water summons. And then you make them pay the 2 extra, and then maybe you miss Dragon on top of it as anyway. And actually, Vanille, when you've got stuff like Wall on the field, which means that they have to target Wall, basically get rid of Wall before they can target anything else with the summon. Yeah, I really, really like that with Vanille, because you can make them pay the additional, and they still have to target the one forward they don't want to target anyway. Claris, already gone over it. EX, that can search you a king, so the main search target is Kolka, but it can also search you Leo as well, and they're the only 3 that are in the deck. Next up we have Kashi 11, and again another multi-element forward, but it also can get you a forward back to your break zone, and there will be a lot of times in this deck where you'll be wanting to recast some of the forwards from your break zone. 3 Tyro, pretty standard, multi-element, can search you any forward. What more is there to say? And similar for Shantoto as well. Although Shantoto is worth noting that whilst getting obviously a board wipe is very important, actually getting that multi-element on the field as well is very important. Now having just a Schlotter and then some of these other backups isn't enough. You need to have at least Tyro, Shantoto or Katshi to be able to get that multi-element, otherwise you're never going to be able to cast, like Ruby Weapon, you'd have to have another Ruby Weapon in hand to be able to cast it, and Kelga you need another win, so you can see what I mean. But yeah, massive focus on multi-element with the backups. Schlotters are nice to have, but you know, there's so many good Earth backups that you could switch some of these out for something else. Like, for example, for Neil, you could just say, well, actually, why don't you just run Lael, because then you can probably cancel the summon straight up. But I like Vanille's like versatility and the fact you can keep on reusing as well. She's only a one-of, but still, I really like her for that effect. And you know, there's actually not that many 2-cost backups in the deck. There's only 4 unique names, so that's not the best when it comes to efficiency, and especially given that 3 of them are Mobius, so that's kind of sucky. You've got something like Claris to be able to get yourself that backup, and Katshi also gets you something back to hand as well. But there could easily be a situation where you just have to play a Tyro turn 1, which sucks. Right, moving on to the forwards. So we have Leo. So for each character you control other than Leo, he gains plus 1,000 power, and the backups you control can produce CP of any element. So another means of you being able to use multi-element backups. So if you are struggling, you haven't got your Tyro, Shantoto, Katshi, whatever, Leo is another means of getting multi-element. Now, the reason I chose Leo over something like Riku specifically, is because Leo, I often found that you're having to play Leo because you're forced to play Leo, and there aren't enough multi-element forwards in this deck to really warrant putting something like Riku in the deck. So just playing that 1-cost Leo just to get him onto the field, so then you can play the other forward in your hand if you somehow don't have things like Tyro or Shantoto. It's just another means of being able to play stuff, and if left long enough, he can get pretty big. Right, Sarah Mobius. So obviously she can make it so 2 forwards fight, or she can draw you a card. Perfectly fine. Again, just another Mobius card. And while I'm thinking of it, I think Leo is actually the only non-Mobius forward in the deck, but I put him in there as another Claris target. But yeah, Sarah Mobius, pretty standard, makes 2 things fight. What I really like with Sarah Mobius with the weapons is the fact that if you choose Ruby Weapon to fight something else, if Ruby Weapon is dealt damage, the damage comes 1,000 instead. So it doesn't matter what it's fighting, that damage will become 1,000, unless of course your opponent does have something like, I've forgotten its name now, Kuchaspel, or obviously Adelard as well. Actually, no, Adelard wouldn't affect it because Adelard's only the abilities can be reduced, whereas Kuchaspel makes it so no damage can be reduced. So they'd have to have Kuchaspel basically. But yeah, also just a nice standard way to be able to hopefully get rid of some stuff. And you'll also notice there is no Sophie, because I've got this Sophie instead. So if Sophie has dealt damage to a forward due to an ability, double the damage instead. Weird wording for a card because it only triggers off of her own ability, not stuff like Sarah Mobius, for example, so yeah, it's weird. But when you cast a character of cost 5 or more, choose 1 forward, your opponent controls it, deal it damage equal to Sophie's power. This effect will only trigger once per turn, and there's lots of 5 costs in the deck, so you should hopefully get Sophie's trigger to happen at least once. Arciella, standard really good mono earth card that's also Mobius, and also it's removing your opponent's summons from their break zone, if not, removing some of your own. There are 8 summons in your deck, so there's a good chance you play Arciella, you should have at least 1 there. Gabranth, only a one-off, but it's an EX, and it's a really useful EX because it searches you pretty much all of your forwards, and a fair amount of the forwards actually have S abilities as well. Not Kelga, well, I say fair few of them, the weapons do. So you got Emerald Weapon, Ruby Weapon, and Sapphire. Oh, no, Sapphire actually doesn't either, but Ruby Weapon has got a decent S, to be honest. Choose a 1 forward, but they have to have 2, you get removed from the game. Worse things have happened. But yeah, Gabranth, just a nice EX, and potentially also can become a big forward as well. Kelga, really, really useful because it breaks one of your opponent's bigger forwards. Again, though, you will need to make sure that you've got the wind on your backup line, or the wind in hand technically, to be able to pay for Kelga's entry effect so you can break said forward. But then just having him standard there as an 8k, you know, first strike block with first strike. Oh God, I can't speak. First strike with Brave and Haste is really, really strong. And then you throw Maya into the mix to give him plus 2k. He's a 10k first striker. You've got stuff like Mobius as well to be able to buff him. So Kelga becomes very, very threatening. Wall. So you could have gone for, well, I could have gone for the 6-cost Earth Wall that plays another Mobius onto the field. But to be honest, there are 2 reasons why I didn't. One is because my friend was basically built a similar deck, but used that Earth Wall, so I didn't want to do that. But also, I'd never really used this wall, and its form of protection I actually really, really like. So, yeah, obviously his cost is reduced by every character of cost 5 or more, so that means his cost is reduced by Tyro and Shantoto as well. But also, some of your, like something like Maya, she is cheaper, because obviously you can, you get 2 cards back to hand, hopefully, through her effect. So, being able to play Wall onto the field, and playing for like only 3 for that nice defensive buff is really, really useful. But then ultimately also just playing things like Maya onto the field when he's already there draws you a card off of Wall's effect, as well as revealing cards through Maya. Also works really, really nicely with Sapphire Weapon. If you do happen to have 5 weapons in your break zone, you can play it onto the field for free, which then immediately draws you a card. I quite like that. Emerald Weapon. Right, we're going over the weapons now. None of the weapons are that good. An Emerald Weapon is probably the worst. So if it's discarded from your hand due to your opponent's summon's abilities, you can pay 1. If you do so, you get to play it onto the field. I guess that's nice if you're up against ice or a certain breed of wind which runs the outdated Zidane. I mean, there are other cards as well, right there, where they get to remove stuff or discard stuff from hand. So the new Zidane, obviously, it wouldn't work with Emerald Weapon because it has to be put into the break zone rather than removed from game. So that kind of sucks. But yeah, and then it's got the S ability, which is S, 3 wind, dull, deal 2,000 damage to for each backup your opponent controls to all the forwards they control. So it's just not that great. It's very expensive. It costs you 5, and you have to dull Emerald Weapon, and you might get to deal 8, 10k to your opponent's forwards. If they're having a bad game, that punishes you as well with this card. If they've only got 2 or 3 backups, and to be honest, a lot of really competitive, fast, aggressive decks don't run many backups now. Like, there's some decks that run like maybe 10 at most backups, because those backups will just have, similar to a lot of the forwards in the game, just utility of entering the field. So yeah, this card is not very good, to be honest, but it utilizes, well, it is utilized by some of the other weapons, or Sapphire Weapon specifically, but it also can become big through something like Maya and potentially Brave as well, so you could attack with it and then use its S ability. Genova Synthesis, so potentially getting to deal 8k to all of your opponents' board is really, really good. Again, a Mobius, so Maya giving it a buff and giving it Brave, it's fantastic. And this is one of the reasons I went into Mono Earth specifically as well, without having other stuff, is, what's that? Text. When it enters the field, it'll 4k damage to all the forwards opponent controls. If you control 5 or more Earth backups, deal 8,000 damage to all the forwards opponent controls. Now, obviously, Shantoto actually gains all of the other elements, which means that technically it's also a fire backup and a water backup and a whatever backup. But there are some cards where they say it has to be like, you know, it can't have other elements. But thankfully, Genova Synthesis only checks to see if it's Earth. It is, so that means it will deal 8k to the entire board. Sapphire Weapon, so if you have 5 or more weapon in your break zone, the cost required to cast Sapphire Weapon is reduced by 5, so it can become free. And then when it's put from the field into the break zone, you get to draw 2 cards, which isn't the worst, but it's really not that great, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's one of the weird things about this deck that you don't really notice at first, but once you start playing it, is actually it's got a lot of draw power. You've got things like Maya, Sapphire Weapon, Wall, which keep on getting you cards to hand. As I mentioned before, getting cards back to hand using stuff like Catchy and then replaying them, so maybe Sapphire Weapon to replay it again for free, isn't the worst. If you've got Wall on the field, you then get a card to hand. Maya, so yeah, like I said, one of the big parts of this deck. Now, really, I probably should have put 3 of this card into the deck. But the problem is there were lots of 3-ofs that I wanted to avoid putting too much of the same stuff. But yeah, you can easily put 3 Maya in the deck, and it will work, probably function even better, to be perfectly honest with you. You could probably get rid of a Sophie, or maybe even an Arciela, maybe a Grant actually, to have a 3rd Maya. But yeah, she gives all your category Mobius plus 1,000 power and Brave. I think I said 2,000 power earlier, sorry, my mistake. Plus 1,000 power and Brave, that's really strong. Yeah, it was for Kelga, wasn't it? Yeah, making Kelga a 9k first striker. I mean, he's already a first striker, but you get where I'm going with this. He's just incredibly strong, but so many of these forwards, just getting 1k and Brave is so good. And then she potentially gets you 2 cards to hand as well, and it's very, very likely, given that there are 27 Mobius cards in the deck. So yeah. And then we've got Ruby Weapon, so probably my favourite of the weapons, because if it's dealt damage, it becomes 1000 instead. Just a nice static ability. And then when it blocks, you have to dull it. That does kind of suck, but at least it's not going to die. And then its Well Sand S ability, perfectly fine. Again, getting those S's back to hand through something like Catchy, or finding off of Gabranth, also quite fun as well. And I have actually played a game where I've had Ruby Weapon in hand, my opponent's had 2 forwards, and I've had the 2 other Ruby Weapons in my hand. So, sorry, Ruby Weapon on the field. And you can Well Sand 1 forward, and then immediately Well Sand the other forward as well on the stack. So you actually get to remove both. They don't have to be there when they resolve, they only have to be there when you cast it. So you get to remove both, which is quite fun. And then moving on to the backups. So Hashmal, there's a fun little 1 CP summon, which is just really nice in a pinch, because just 1 CP, something gains plus 7k. Very, very nice. And then obviously if you do remove enough Earth summons from your break zone, then all your forwards get plus 7,000 power, which is pretty substantial. Mist Dragon, standard good Earth summon that you get to just remove your opponent's break zone or cancel a summon, or, you know, it's loads of good stuff. Titan, so you could probably remove Hashmal and put a second of this Titan in there, because it is quite useful, because it has both offensive and defensive mechanisms. But yeah, potentially get to break something, which is quite nice, or deal something, 9k, sorry. Or just buffing all your forwards by 5,000. Again, just kind of leaning into make your big things even bigger. Cactuar should not be hard for you to hit all of the elements for Cactuar's effect. I mean, you'll have at least Earth, another element, and then discard a wind or water or fire from your hand to make it so Cactuar has 3 elements to just outright break something. And finally, Hecaton Shear. Be able to board wipe everything is really, really nice. Now, what's actually fun is that you use this Ruby Weapon. Ruby Weapon will only take 1,000 damage, because whenever it receives damage, it's reduced to 1,000. That's very nice. And that is my weapon deck, Mobius Weapons. So, yeah, I mean, you could switch up a lot of these forwards, but the big focus for me was using Wall, using Maya, and using the weapons. And then, because you got Mara in the deck, just try and throw as many Mobius cards into the deck as well. You could easily make this into a 2-element deck, probably something like Wind, because Kelga puts in a lot of work, and similarly, Wall is really, really effective. So, yeah, you could easily go into Wind, and then you start running stuff like, maybe, I don't know, Yasmat, but that's, nobody wants to play 9 CP for that. Or, I've now forgotten every other Mobius card in the game, but there are so many Mobius cards, and it's a lot of fun to play. The only reason I kept most of the other Mobius cards in Earth is just because just that little bit of added consistency. But you could easily throw in, just make all the forwards different elements, it doesn't matter. As long as you get your multi-element on your backups, you're fine. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to run, and it actually does alright. It poses a problem sometimes, because things like Ruby Weapon and Maya, they're hard to get around, and then you play something like Wall for only 2 CP, and it's like, well, now you've got to target that before you get rid of everything else. So it's a lot of fun, and RCR, again, strong, stupid card. So yeah, I just really, really enjoy this deck, and I recommend it. But yeah, let me know what cards you guys might put into this deck, how might you change it. There's quite a few Mobius cards in the game, some that a lot of people forget about, because they just look at me like, oh yeah, this card finally, or yeah, this character finally got a card, and overlooking completely that it is Mobius. But yeah, if it's got very pretty art, chances are it's a Mobius card. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I will see you in the next episode.